Hi there, my name is Monica Annette Manney, and I'm excited to be presenting about addictions and substance abuse around my client, Robin. Today we're just going to walk through a couple things about Robin, and I'm excited to share what we've landed on in terms of her treatment plan and how we will move forward. So, just the introduction and objective. So, the purpose of the presentation is to explore Robin's concerns, how we want to treat these concerns, and what we will do moving forward in order to ensure longevity and success in her treatment. Just some overview of the case. Robin is an Indigenous woman who traveled across the country to go to Ohio State University. OSU is important to note that it was not her first choice. It is a school that she decided to go to, though. She has had experience with alcohol use when she was in high school, and her family, found her using alcohol on different occasions. When she got to college, she went to a party that she had marijuana that was quote unquote wet, made her a little bit nervous, so she removed herself a little bit from using different substances. Then during a study week, Robin had a hard time focusing, and a friend of hers gave her Adderall. At this point, Robin is using Adderall every day, and she is telling folks that she wants to be diagnosed with ADHD in order to receive medication that will help her focus. And again, she is using that Adderall every day at this point. We will talk about treatment approaches a little bit further into the presentation, as well as recommended treatment and level of care. So again, her background is she is indigenous. Presenting concerns have to do with alcohol use, marijuana use, and Adderall use as well. So stimulant use, relevant history. Again, her indigenous culture is really important, as well as the fact that she is away from home. She's having trouble studying. She is a first year. She's a freshman. She's 18 years old. So still getting used to being away from family, still getting used to a different level of studying and a different level of challenge when it comes to schooling. So, according to the DSM-5 TR, some of the diagnoses that we will find is a stimulant use disorder, moderate and alcohol use disorder, mild cannabis use disorder, unspecified. And one of the things that I wanted to rule out is ADHD because that is a concern of hers. She wants to be diagnosed with ADHD, but based off of the DSM-5 TR and the information that we are provided, ADHD is not a concern or a diagnosis that should be flagged at this time. I do want to note that there is a myth that relates to her cultural background, excuse me. So the firewater myth is something that I had the opportunity to speak about in a couple of my papers. The firewater myth is the belief that indigenous people react differently or they're predisposed to alcohol use disorders because of genetics. Now, this is not an appropriate belief because it is based in nothing, it's baseless. It is also a stereotype that makes it seem like indigenous people are more violent on alcohol or when they're using alcohol. We will talk about this a little bit more further into the presentation, but it feels important to note that this is not true and it's something to be considered when evaluating a client of Indigenous background for a number of reasons. There may be stigma surrounding alcohol use disorder because of the firewater myth. There also might be internalized, racism and internalized issues with alcohol use disorder because of the firewater myth. There also might be fear associated with that type of diagnosis because of the firewater myth. It might be a feeling of lack of control or a feeling of judgment that might come based off of this because of the aggressive nature that is in alignment with the firewater myth. So all of this information came from the Encyclopedia Britannica, but it felt really important to talk about a history of Adderall addiction, the history of Adderall addiction, excuse me. So it was first synthesized in the 1880s, and then it was resynthesized in the 1920s, and the side effects were noted then began to be misused in the mid 20th century. In the 60s and 70s, it declined in popularity because of abuse concerns, but then in the 2000s, 2010s, it becomes the party drug. And then there's a sharp increase of ADHD diagnosis during pandemic, so increase in Adderall usage. So now we're going to transition into theoretical approaches. We do have two different theoretical approaches, and I did break these down into just some backgrounds, some reasons for using it, and then potential issues. So theoretical approach number one is narrative therapy, which was created by Michael White and David Epstein in the 1980s. The definition, according to the American Psychological Association, is that it's a treatment that helps individuals rewrite their lives and reinterpret them. Now, there are a couple of things on here. I don't want to read directly from the screen, but there are a couple of things that should be noted. The narrative therapy is helpful because it is culturally aware, because it is strategic and innovation, and because it has a storytelling basis. This is especially important for indigenous cultures. And then that strategic innovation is also important because in a culture, indigenous culture, where pathologizing is not necessarily the best route, this approach moves away from that. And then in terms of culturally aware, it really focuses on self-expression and reconnection and meaning making, which is important. Potential issues, there's a Western world focus, excuse me, in clinician insider versus outsider status. So the clinician may not be of indigenous background. Indigenous client might feel like, you don't really understand where I'm coming from. You don't really understand what what my concerns are, especially within context of who I am. So those are some concerns, and that's that first theoretical approach. The second theoretical approach that I chose is client-centered therapy, which was created by Carl Rogers in the 1940s. Now, the importance of this, according to the American Psychological Association, is that the client is able to resolve conflicts and reorganize values and approach to their life, and then ultimately changing behavior that they consider problematic. Now, the two benefits of this is that it's culturally relevant, it offers unconditional positive regard, which is great when it comes to something as serious as these three different acknowledgments, and it explores values and it helps the client center values. As we talked about that Western focus, it is individualism focused. And it ignores like historical trauma, which we know that Indigenous folks do have that historical trauma. Now, when we're comparing the two theoretical approaches and then kind of deciding on one, I think person-centered or client-centered therapy, of course, is led by the client and it builds trust, but it lacks relapse tools and it's dependent on the client's speed. And the narrative therapy is, of course, reauthoring identity and it aligns with indigenous storytelling practices, which is good and it's empowering. Now, the similarities between those two approaches is that autonomy is given to a client. The client is the expert. They don't pathologize, and there's empathy and understanding. But when comparing these two things, especially that relapse part and those cultural considerations, the final decision for Robin is to use narrative therapy. Now, when testing for drug abuse, we're going to use a drug abuse screening test. That's DAST. The format is a 10 or 28 item self-report. It has strong reliability and concurrent validity across diverse groups, which is really important. It's free to use, so accessible, and there's no license required. Only issue is that it's not a diagnostic, it's a screening only. So it's that primary step in order to get to a long-term step. So we're going to talk about levels of care quickly. So there are different levels of care, obviously, and it's really important to decide which level of care works best for the client. And those are really dependent on a couple of things, whether the client is able to like manage themselves, whether the client needs 24-hour supervision, whether the client will be dedicated to it, if there's a higher risk for relapse, et cetera, et cetera. So early intervention obviously cannot work. We have to rule that out because we're pretty far into the process with Robin. Outpatient, I think, not even I think, I mean, based off research and on Robin's case, we need more than just outpatient. Partial hospitalization. Um, I think for Robin, it just hasn't gotten to that point yet. She's still able to function in day-to-day life and things like that. And the inpatient residential also not necessarily. She's able to um, navigate her life. Now, intensive outpatient. So, intensive outpatient includes group counseling, individual counseling, psychoeducation. It also brings the family system into therapy as well. From what I've seen, it's about a 16-week dedication to something like this, which is really good for someone with a stimulant use disorder. So the decision ended up being on intensive outpatient program, which addresses Robin's need for frequency, education, and support. So the relapse model that we chose in the instance that, Robin relapse or just in preparation for her not to relapse, right, is the matrix model. The matrix model is culturally supportive because it centers community and groups. Stimulant specific was created originally around stimulants. And again, it's community centered. It's created originally for stimulants, and it's also helpful for centers, communities, and groups. Now, in within the relapse model, there are roles for different individuals, right? So the client has to attend that 16-week program, participates in trigger identification, so we can better understand what the issues are and what might put her in a position to want to use alcohol, marijuana, or a stimulant like Adderall. And then following the personal emergency plan, in the instance that something comes up, she's able to follow that plan that is established before that instance comes up, right? The clinician implements the matrix model in various therapeutic practices and ensures cultural relevance. We'll talk about it a little bit more in a little bit, but it's really important that it is not performative and not surface level the way that a clinician interacts with the culture of a client. It has to be something that's implemented throughout, and that in this instance, like I said, we'll talk about it in a bit, but in this experience is really like grounded in culture. And then supportive community, whether that's family, friends, the indigenous culture around Robin. The family participates in group sessions and offers accountability and support, and also helps avoid high risk situations. So helps Robin not go into those situations where she is, I don't know, where she's tempted to use. They're cognizant of her triggers and those that trigger identification as well as the emergency plan. So let's talk about the treatment plan. So the goal is to reduce and discontinue non-prescribed Adderall. Intervention is price contingency management. Now, price contingency management, of course, is being able to be like given something in return for inaction. Per the research that I was able to do, this programming is not very long, and once it falls off, it does need something in addition. So I do want to flag here that CBT is the thing that would be in addition. Intervention number two is the matrix model relapse prevention training. And then our goal number two is increase daily functioning without daily Adderall use. So figuring out those study techniques and knowledge of our resources and things like that in the community. And then again, the matrix model, building healthy routines and habits. Other cultural considerations. So I did flag that we would talk about this, and this was really important to who Robin is. So there are five things on here. We'll talk briefly about all five of them just to provide clarity into, the things that clinicians should consider when they're going through, what clinicians should consider when they're going through like a case with a client of Indigenous background. So cultural concepts of illnesses is really important. Not all cultures see addictions or illnesses as concerns. So it's really important to note that some folks might see, something as like a spiritual battle, and they might see something of a different realm or a demonic attack or something like that. And it's important to consider those things because if you're not coming or looking from the same viewpoint, it might be difficult to get to the goal if you all are coming at the problem in different directions. Avoiding tokenism, we talked about this briefly, but engaging Indigenous leaders for real decision making, not just performative gestures, is important because that tokenism can really turn off clients, and clients will feel like, hey, I'm not comfortable with this. You didn't really do your research. This is not real life. It's clear that you just picked and cherry picked different parts of the culture and inserted them into our sessions. So alcohol was introduced as a tool for domination and exploitation. So again, it's really interesting and definitely worth a deep dive about that firewater myth and the way that alcohol was used to control folks in indigenous communities from settlers or by settlers, excuse me. And then historical medical injustices. As a Black American, I'm aware of the Tuskegee Syphilis Project and also like sterilization and different things in communities that communities of color, like Black communities that have happened in the United States. But one of the things that I learned in doing this research is that there is history in with medical injustices, excuse me. So most recently forced sterilizations, degradation. Um, I'm having a hard time pronouncing that word for some reason. Stealing babies from families, leaving Indigenous people mistrusting medical systems. The last one that I found very interesting that I never thought about is the measurement of like a vessel. Because when we think about the different assessments that we do to see if folks are having more alcohol than they need or a good amount or less and or that than they want. We have a very specific view of what those different vessels look like. Like this is a beer cup, this is a shot glass, this is like a mug. I know we don't really use a mug, but we have very specific ways that we measure alcohol. Now, in different cultures, they don't have those same things. For, people might use like a goblet or gauntlet, I can't remember the word. And then how does that translate into our westernized assessments? It's really important to consider that because again, we want to reach a common goal, but if we're coming at it from different angles and different ends, it just is not clear. You know what I mean? It's not clear. What the measurement is, or if there is an objective measurement that we're duly working out of. So thank you so much for listening to this presentation. It was such an honor to be able to do this work and learn more about the Indigenous community, learn more about the way that substance use in the Indigenous community has manifested in history, especially with Westernization and um, I'm blanking on the word. And with settlers coming in and kind of, shaking things up. So I definitely appreciated the ability to do this work. And thank you so much for your time.